Hey everyone, welcome back to the stream. This is Coding It Live, and I'm coding it wrong, better known in real life as Josh Justice. But as I always say, as you watch, you'll be able to decide for yourself whether or not I'm coding it wrong. And if you're watching live, you can interact in the chat and you can let me know where you fall on that spectrum of agreement or disagreement. I'm always happy to have new information. Got some really great interaction last week in the chat from Mr. Khan with some ideas about accessibility. It was really helpful for me to learn from. Today, we are continuing what we did last time. We're going to be working on adding tests to a React Native application. It's an existing application, but we're adding lower level unit tests and talking about trade-offs and ways to go about doing so. Couple of quick announcements. First, I want to thank TestDouble, my employer, for allowing me to work on this and supporting me in this. I'm very excited to be working at a place that cares about testing and software quality and working in all these technologies. Check us out if you want to work here or you want to work with us at your company. Another few announcements. I have some workshops coming up. I'm going to be posting these on social media as well to let everybody know about. But if you want to learn about using Expo to build apps for web and mobile, or want to learn more about React Native Testing Library and have 3 hours to interact with me and work together on it, or React Testing Library and Cypress on the web, there's testing workshops on all these topics. So if you go to codingitwrong.com/speaking, you'll find out more information about these workshops and how you can join in. Most of them are virtual. One of them is here in Atlanta, Georgia. So I hope you can join in. Also, if you haven't heard, I published a book, self-published recently, Outside in React Development, a TDD primer. So this is on React on the web, so a little different than our React Native focus here, but all the same principles apply in React Native as well, and the testing library is very similar in how it's oriented. So at outsidein.dev/book, you can find out more about this and get it in print or ebook. So feel free to check it out. With that, let's jump in. I'm trying a bigger font size this time, so we're going to see how that works out. We've got nice big text here that might help you out. We've got our test suite for our React Native application. And again, this is called Shirley. It is a pun on a S-U-R-E-L-Y. It is a pun on Airplane, old movie, because I'm old. But it's a to-do list application. And believe it or not, I actually found like it was helpful to build a new to-do list application. It is helpful to me. It's running an Expo on React Native Web, so it runs on mobile and on the web as well. And I love it. It's really, really fun. And I've got some screen tests, some high-level tests that cover a lot of this functionality of these different screens all together. Wow, my app is kind of not responding. There we go. But I'm wanting to add lower-level test functionality for all the different components in the app. And you might not be able to see the font size of the components on the side. But I want to add these lower-level tests. And as we go, we're going to basically say if we wanted to test each of these components, how would we do it? And then we can decide together, or you can decide individually if you think it's useful to write a low-level component test like that. But getting thorough coverage of our logic is really, really great. So let's give that a try. Last time, I forget what components we did, so I'm just going to check my notes for what we're doing next. Next up on the list is ErrorMessage.js. Well, let's see what this component does, and then we'll decide about what to do for testing it. So we have an error message that takes in a theme. That's the React Native paper theme for some nice dark mode styling. It's got some children and a style. We're just passing the style prop along for any custom styling we want to do. I see we pull in the error color here from the theme. But so what behavior is happening in this component? What logic? Well, if we have any children passed in, if it's truthy, we render this text element. And if we don't have any children passed in, we don't render the text element at all. So it's not just an empty text element. There's no null is returned, or an undefined potentially is returned as a result. And this is important behavior for me because I want to make sure that no matter what styling I pass in here to style this text element, that if there's no error message, I know it won't show, so that I don't need to put this conditional everywhere that the error message element happens. I can just use an error message, and a null or a falsy error message is not going to be rendered at all. It's not going to be taking up space at all. So the fact that nothing is rendered is actually going to be important for the functionality of this. So that's something I'd like to test for the error message. So let's add a test for it. All right, we got this. Before I forget, let me go ahead and we're gonna have to switch back and forth between the tests and the text here just because of my font size. So now I'm running the new error message spec and it says the suite must contain at least one test. All right. So let's set up our describe block and then we'll figure out what is it that we're testing? What is it that we want to test here? So what do I want error message to do? Really, I guess there's two behaviors, two circumstances here. I want to make sure it renders when there is children, and that it does not render at all anything when there are no children. So let's see how to do that. When there are children, just looking for the text of the children seems to make the most sense to me to check for. So let's try that. We'll say, this is an error message. There, that's an error message there. We're going to render. What do we have? No, it looks like, yeah, I thought LSP would have automatically imported here. It looks like that's not happening, so that's unfortunate. From, at least we have that. So we got render. We're going to render error message. Yeah, it looks like my LSP is not working. Maybe I should be using VS Code. Well, at least we got that. Render error message, and then in here we're going to have error message as the child. All right, we want to render this, and then we want to say expect screen. Oh, there we go. That added the import for me. Get by text. And I haven't had time to process through the feedback I got from Mr. Khan last week about learning more about get by role. And so that's something I'd like to do in the future, but for now I'm continuing to use get by text just to get the text directly. And I like to say query by text to be truthy. A couple ways you can do that, but that's how I like to write the test. So I want to make sure that when I render error message with some text there, that is available in the render JSX output. So let's check. It is found. Oh, I didn't add a name to it though. Renders an error message. So renders a provided error message. Yep, that's more helpful. And let's break it to make sure that the test will fail if it's missing. Expected to be truthy, and we got null. Yeah, so if the error message was not rendered out, we would get null there. Great, so that's that one side of the conditional. Let's try the other side. It does not render any elements when the error message is falsy. Sometimes I like to, even though I'm not going to test every type of falsiness, maybe it's useful to put that in the test name to specify kind of what my intent is. Let's just copy and paste this. We'll say null error message, just to sort of communicate the intent via the variable name there. And we interpolate it because you wouldn't really in a real application usage just say error message with no children like that. You'd be passing in a variable and it would just happen to have the value null. So I think that's a little bit realistic. So how do we check to make sure that nothing is actually rendered out? So I'm not actually sure. I don't prepare for these streams. But one thing I think, I do have this test ID in there. That seems fragile to say, make sure the test ID is not present. But let me start with that just to get the test passing, and let me see if we can improve the assertion after that. So one way I can ensure that nothing is rendered is to say the test ID error message is not present. So we'll say screen.query by test ID, and let me check it, error message to be null. So if there's a null error message, make sure that the error message element is not rendered out at all. Let's see it pass, and then we'll break it to make it fail. So what if it's unconditional and it's always rendered? I would expect to see this test fail. Yep, expected null, but we got all of this. Great. Okay, but that's a little bit fragile. So let's say to do less fragile assertion. So let's copy and paste this. Kind of what I'd like to be able to say is expect that the root is null, but I can't imagine that that works. Nope. Let's see if LSP screen container. Nope, there is a container. There's something there. Let's see what else. Well, you know, actually, let me check the docs instead of just browsing through that. Let's go through React Native Testing Library and check the screen render result. So let's see if the render result will tell us, hey, I just want to know if just that null is the whole thing that's returned. Okay, render result. Having the properties described below. It's got queries, it's got update on mount, debug. Let me actually run, container, reference to the rendered root element. So that's interesting. Seems like container would be null, but maybe there's some kind of intelligence going on. Let's do screen.debug and see what is outputted there. See if it actually says null or what. Oh, did I break it? I didn't put it back. Oops. All right. You gotta be careful what you're doing. Saved. Let me just remove this assertion and figure out that screen debug and see what that debug output is. It's nothing. So that's interesting. Let's just search React Native Testing Library, check for null rendered. To be empty DOM element. This is in React Testing Library. To be, and let's, we can check testing library Jest Native. Is that the name of the testing library? Let's see if Jest Native has anything helpful. Jest Native's documentation. Someone said they enjoyed watching my video to see if it fails. To watch me fail, which they did not mean that way, but I like to take it out of a context. Disable is not what we want. To be enabled, to be empty. Get by test ID empty to be empty. Oh, to be empty could actually be interesting, but that's referring to no content. Yeah. This is not, nothing is really occurring to me here. I could check for how many text elements are shown, but I'm okay with partial progress, as I did last time. I left something in progress. So I think I'm going to leave the to-do here, but I'm just going to make sure that the error message is null and taken away. And something I could do to make this a little bit less fragile is to make sure that it actually is present in the case of the error message. So that way we're confirming that there is a change. Something that was there when the error message shows is not there anymore. So let's save and see if that passes. It does. And say check that nothing is rendered, because that would really be better. But this is something. This is progress. So I will look into that offline, maybe, if I get around to it, and see if there's a way to check that nothing is returned and rendered as a result. But that's what I know for now. And that's okay. It is better to move on and get more test coverage rather than waiting to see if this test is perfect. And the way I justify myself is to encourage you all to say, hey, don't feel like you have to have the standard of perfect test. Find something that's useful, that's helpful, and then move on to something else. All right. So let's see what else. I went through my notes in advance to see what to test here. Next, we have loading indicator. Let's take a look at this. So this is rendering out a React Native paper activity indicator. It's just specifying a size, accessibility label, and some style, some margin. So I could check that something with the accessibility label loading is rendered out, and I guess that's helpful to make sure that it's accessible, but that's kind of just copy and pasting what's there. There's not really any logic, there's not really any behavior in this component. And so I would say, this is not actually that helpful to write a unit test for. So instead, let's look at an approach to have it show up in the test coverage report that it's not needed, that it's fine. I'm going to switch here first to run the test coverage command. It's yarn test, which is running Jest. And if you pass coverage, it's going to check the test coverage. Just by default uses a tool called Istanbul to measure the test coverage. And we looked at this last week, where this shows for all of your files, percentage of the statements, branches, functions, and lines that are covered. If you go to loading indicator, well, so this is interesting. This is actually 100% covered in terms of the code has been executed by other tests, but no assertions are happening to make sure that the loading indicator is actually present. And we can't tell that from this output. So maybe that's not the best example, though. Maybe I should take some other file that has a low percentage and remove it from there. Well, yeah, I mean, if I was to remove remove it from coverage, I would just be saying, hey, it's not, There'll be a way to hide if we have low values here, but in this case, it is showing 100% values. But I think, you might also say, hey, when I'm browsing through my list of components, I don't see a unit test for this component. What's going on there? And so indicating in the test coverage that I'm making an intentional choice not to cover this. This doesn't need unit test coverage. Communicate something to the user. And we can do this. I think I have a link. Yeah, there we go. All right, so here's the documentation for Istanbul, the code coverage tool. And there's a way to ignore code for coverage purposes. And so you can say Istanbul ignore next to ignore the next thing in the source code. And it looks like there's other kind of coverage skip hints. Let's see here. Ignore if, ignore next. I think I can just do the ignore next. So really what I want to do is to say, hey, ignore this function for code coverage purposes. Don't check it. Don't check to see if it's covered or not. So I think what will happen here, if I save this, if I've done it right, is that the loading indicator file won't show up in the coverage report at all. So let's find out if that's the case. Rerun yarn test coverage. It's going to run through the whole suite again. Loading indicator.js is in fact showing up. So I think something else that I can do is to check the output that comes into this file. Let me check it out here. This code coverage is also rendered out as HTML in a coverage folder. So let me send that over to Firefox. And yeah, so this allows us to browse through. And my goal is to hide all the yellow and red by covering it with good tests that really confirm the functionality. So let's check it out here, loading indicator. So check it out. So actually this 8x is showing that this code is executed 8 times through different tests. And it's this, because there's no macros next to it, is showing that that is ignored. So it looks like I need to ignore the stylesheet.create as well. So let's just add that. I'm gonna, this coverage actually reruns, which is nice. Let me reload this file. Great, so it says red there. Well, it says 0% though. Oh yeah, check it out. So in this report here, this says loading indicator 0%, but it's all shown up in white. That's actually fine. No coverage is needed. There are no statements requiring code coverage in this file. And let's check out the console output. Yep, in the console output it says 0, but it shows up as gray. Like, don't need to cover those branches. So this is just a way to indicate to myself, I have decided that code coverage, unit coverage of loading indicator is not needed. And you could decide otherwise, or a future developer or I in the future might decide to change that. But for now, this shows that it's an intentional choice not to cover it. All right, let's see what else is next. What do we want to test next? Navigation bar. All right, we're gonna get something a bit more substantial here. So this navigation bar is the bar across the top here where when I'm in a child page, I've got a back button to go back. And either way, I have this toggle to show the bar. But check this out on the web. If I'm on the web, there is the back button, but there's nothing on the right-hand side because the bar on larger screen sizes, the bar always shows. And I can show this happening, this responsive behavior, by kind of adjusting the width here. When it pops down to a smaller screen size, a smaller viewport size, the sidebar collapses, and I get this this menu icon here that I can click on to get it to slide to the side to show the sidebar. So this is the behavior that I want. And as we look through the code, we can kind of take a look at it. This custom navigation bar for the top. What do we have? We have a back button that only shows when the back prop is passed in. And that's a prop provided by React Navigation that lets us know if there is something to go back to in the navigation stack. So this is either rendered or not. So that's some behavior to check. Is it rendered or not? And then also we want to make sure that navigation.goback is called when it's pressed, when it is in fact shown. Then we have the right-hand side. We have the toggle there. When you press on it, it says navigation.toggleDrawer, and it shows if show drawer toggle is true. And that comes from this little tiny little helper function here. But we're comparing this breakpoint here to check to see if it's large or not. Let me go into use breakpoint to show what that is. So in use breakpoint, we're calling this React Native call here, use window dimensions, and we're checking to see the width. And depending on the answer, yeah, we get the breakpoint for the width. If it's greater than the large size, we return large. Otherwise, we return medium. So that's the logic that ultimately goes back to React Native's use window dimensions to check the size. So this would actually be nice to be able to check. I'm not sure on my brain without trying it manually that the logic is actually right. So verification would be good. If we're on a smaller screen, does this show? If we're on a larger screen, does it not show at all? So let's see how we can test that. Navigation bar spec.js. And interestingly, the component name is custom navigation bar there. That's a little confusing. I don't want to do a file rename right now. Custom navigation bar is a better rename because there's a navigation bar native to React Navigation. So actually, I think what I'm going to do is actually rename this to navigation bar right now, just to make it match with the file name. That'll be less confusing, and I can fix it up later so that it has my preferred name. But making it more consistent now is good. Let me rerun my whole test suite just to make sure that that rename doesn't break anything, because I've got this great coverage. I might as well use it. My new navigation bar spec is failing because it needs to contain at least one test. But other than that, we're fine. So let me save this change. Make sure that as we rerun everything, all the things that import it and pull it in, that we're fine. And yep, we just have, I don't know why that shows like it ran twice. Oh, that's a summary. Navigation bar.spec.js. Yep, so this rename is fine. So let's set it up in here. Port. I'm going to try LSP again to see if we can do that. Let's describe navigation bar. Let's describe the back button. So we're describing one portion of it. We're going to render more. No, that's not it. No. We're going to render. We're going to need that screen as well. So we'll just paste in that import. I could set up a snippet for this. Render navigation bar. It takes props, but we'll just pass in only the props that are needed. So let me come back to that in a second. Render the navigation bar, and then I want to say here, this needs to be an it. It renders a button that allows you to go back when the rnav back prop is present. So sometimes when I have a test name that's this long, I like to add another describe context just to make things a bit readable. So let me do that. Describe when React Nav provides a back prop. So that's indicating from the units level what is the situation. And then we say it renders a back button that allows you to go back. Cool. I think combining all that into one test works out well. So I want to render it. And then I want to call fire event press on screen. Oh, how do I want to get it? Accessibility label back. Again, I do need to learn get by role, but for now we'll do that. Get by label text back. That is again giving us some degree of accessibility to make sure that the back text is available to the user. So when that happens, I want to make sure that expect navigation.goback. So sometimes I like to be able to do the same thing. Expect navigation.goback to have been called. And does it need to be called with anything? Actually, something is passed to it, so this could actually make things a little bit cleaner. I want this to be called with no arguments, because no arguments are needed to be passed to navigation.goback. So that's the most precise thing, is to ensure that no extra nonsense is passed to it that could be problematic. ESLint says that navigation is not defined, so let's define it. We just want an object here. And in that object, we need a go back. That'll be a just function subversion. Let me set the mock name navigation to go back. That can just aid with readability. So we also need to pass this here. Navigation is the navigation prop. And is that the only thing needed? No, we need a back prop passed as well. So back needs to be there, and it just needs to be truthy. So I don't know if that's the real argument, but really the contract of the component we wrote is, if back is truthy, then we do this. So this represents that. in our test. Let's save and see if it passes. Let me narrow it down. Navigation bar, just to keep things fast. I don't know why Jest is not automatically scoping just to the files that changed. Oh, there's a typo in my module name. It failed. Let's see. Cannot read properties of undefined reading title. Okay, so something in our code is requiring something else. Options.title. Okay, and that, we could make this accept a null, but it's good, we don't need to make that's one approach, but it'd be better to make our test more realistic. So I'm going to do that. So let's just say const options, and actually we don't even need anything passed in there. It probably won't blow up as long as you just have an object there. So let's see if this is enough. It passes. So now let me break it. Let's try first, not passing this. Oh, so apparently that's interesting. So apparently onPress doesn't pass anything to the function that's given to it. So that's nice. Let's say that onPress handler is not in place. Okay, our test fails because navigation.goBack is not called. Okay, let's try something else. Let's just say it's never rendered at all. Will the test fail as well? And it does. We can't find an element with accessibility label back. And just as a last thing, just for completeness, it's a back button, but what if we don't give it an accessibility label? Ooh, it actually passes. That's interesting. I wonder if that is the automatic accessibility label. Let's say if the accessibility label is floof instead. It fails. Interesting. So apparently the default accessibility label is back, but I can explicitly set it in my code as well. You can remove it for minimal code, or you could keep it in to make sure that future API changes don't break it. Either way is fine. All right, so this test is passing, and we've confirmed that it does something real. Let's test the other side of this back button scenario then. We'll say, I'm going to copy and paste it. Now is React Nav, is it a back prop? Is it present versus absent, or is it truthy versus falsy? I'm going to actually check the React Navigation docs. The difference should be immaterial, but I want to just, have my test description be realistic. So let's check and see. And this could be a good prompt to understand what is the behavior of this library that I'm interfacing with. Back. So this is an argument to the navigation bar. Is it the stack? It's the, let me find here. So the API reference, it is a drawer navigator. Well, let's just see where this navigation bar is provided. Custom navigation bar. It's provided to the stack navigator. It's the header of a stack navigator. Bar. So what is the screen options? We're just tracing down to find out how this works. Specified under screen options. Options for screens. Configuring the header bar. Navigation set options. There's just a lot of levels of things happening. Header title? No, it's the header. Oh, I call it a navigation bar. They call it a header. Stack screen component, header. Well, configuring the header bar. Yeah, I'm not seeing references to this in the docs. Header style. I mean, I know it works. Interesting. So it might be missing. Full list of options in the reference. I really want to see if I can find this. It's kind of interesting just to be using code that's not in the documents. screen options header. Interesting. Well, okay, I'm having trouble finding this in the box, or the docs, so we're just going to go on with what we have. We'll say React Native provides a true feedback prop versus a false feedback prop. That covers it. That's accurate to JavaScript because null or undefined is falsy as well. So when it provides a falsy back prop, does not render a back button. And so I could check that navigation.goBack is not called, but there's no occasion to call it. And so I'm just going to remove that because I think that's not necessary. We're just going to confirm that expect screen query by label text back to be null. Oh yeah, and then back should be equal to false. Rather than omit it, I'm going to explicitly set it to false just so it's clear. I think options is still needed. So I'm going to save this. I expect this to pass. It does, but now let me break it. We'll say, what if the back button is always rendered? Will that test fail? Yep. If the test is that it does not render a back button. Oh, interesting. I cannot read properties of undefined, so it's expecting a navigation prop there. Let me temporarily add that. Maybe there's a reason to always add it. Yeah, at least navigation can be like that. I don't know, just to be 100% sure this renders out okay. Yeah, now it's the expectation itself that's failing. So we're testing our expectation. We expected it to be null, but something was found instead. So I think I will leave that navigation in there. I often have not thought about this before, but this is a good way to make sure that good reason to make sure you see your test fail, and make sure that the error output is what you expect. Because if I just stuck with the other thing, maybe that assertion doesn't work and it was just incidental that other thing was blowing up. So we've now fully specified the back button. Either it's there and functional or it's not there at all. The other thing I wanted to specify was the menu button and making sure that shows or hides. Now I'm not actually sure what's going to happen by default if I don't mock out use breakpoint or anything like that, but I think I don't actually care because I want to go ahead and mock it. I think in this case, whenever you're writing a test, people have used the terms unit test and integration test and end-to-end test, and I use them as well. But there's a lot of ambiguity there. And so instead, what I like to say is when I'm writing a test, what am I integrating with and what am I isolating from, such that what is the unit that I'm defining? I'm going to look at the chat here. Elite Tank TV. Have you ever ran into problems with Expo? React Native in general is new enough and interfacing with native code that with Expo and with React Native in particular, any number of hiccups can come up. Build issues, confusions, having to rebuild from scratch. So I've run into challenges with Expo. The other thing that comes up with Expo is the fact that it doesn't give you full access to all the native code that a React Native CLI app lets you do. But Expo is making more and more ways to be able to pull in native code in unique ways, even things that I haven't really tried yet. So I encourage you to check out the Expo docs to see what are the latest options for incorporating other libraries into your Expo code. But I mean, the big thing I can draw down to in terms of Expo is if you're using React Native CLI, you have accessibility to everything that React Native has to offer in the community, whereas in Expo, you may not be able to use something directly. You might have to jump through a bit of a hoop. In my case, for my app, it's just a simple utility app that just shows information on the screen and mostly uses built-in APIs. Expo is working great for me. The challenge with React Native CLI apps is you need to deal with native iOS and Android building, and that can be fragile, it can be slower, can just be challenging there. So Elite Tank TV, I hope that's helpful. Feel free to ask follow-up questions if you'd like something else. All right, so what I was going to say, I was talking about this component and what am I integrating with and what am I isolating from. In this case, I think it would actually be useful to mock out this breakpoints file so that I could mock the response to use breakpoint and have it return either large or not large. I think that would be useful. So, although that would actually change the value for a large here, but let's explore it. Let's try it and see how it works. All right, we're going to write first the test that we want to be able to write, and this is the menu button. So for the menu button, we say when on a large screen, screen, viewport, app size, web page. Viewport, that's probably a better word. When on a large viewport, although window dimensions is what React Native says, viewport I think is good. It does not render a menu button. So let's check that out. I'm going to copy and paste this just as a starting point. What is the assertion I'm looking for? Its accessibility label is menu. Expect it to be null. And so back doesn't matter here. I think options is going to be needed. Navigation might not be needed. Let's try to keep that out. And we want to say, instead what I want to do is try using just module mocks to import this. Just mock breakpoints. And with just module mocks, I often have to fiddle with like what is mocked by default versus what do I need to do custom by adding a custom argument over here. But I'll just try with this mocking here. So I import use breakpoint, and I want to be able to say something to the effect of use breakpoint mock return value large. So I'm going to return the large value that I got from here that is maybe still the real string value. We'll see if it is or not. So when use breakpoint returns large and I render this component, I expect menu to not be present. So let's save and see if that succeeds or fails. It succeeds. Now let me break my component again to see if that happens. So let's say we always render this component. Will the test now fail because it's not correctly being hidden? Okay, we got navigation is needed again, so I've learned my lesson. I do need to include that navigation in there. Let's do that. There are ways to reuse this stuff as well when your test gets big enough, but this is small enough for now. All right, now remember that I broke my code, and now I'm getting the test failure that I wanted. Maybe I didn't want to see all this stuff, but that's the way things are. And that gives me an idea for a feature we could add to React Native testing library. And I'm hoping to work on my first PR for a feature soon, in the next couple months, to be able to add a feature to React Native testing library. So let me just add a note to myself. Set output on element found RNTL feature. Elite Tank TV says, thank you a lot. Yeah, I'm running into some of those problems and just find answers for the React Native CLI ways of doing it. So I'm kind of thinking about ditching Expo, but I know there are a lot of problems when I will do. Sure. Yeah, Elite, if you haven't checked out Expo's Discord before, I highly recommend it. If you just go to expo.dev, you should be able to find it. But you can chime in the appropriate channel there, ask questions about what you're seeing, and see if you can get quick answers or see if the answers look challenging. The other thing you can do, I really encourage folks to do experiments. Like, let me try a basic Expo app, try a basic React Native CLI app. And if you've been blocked on something in Expo, spin up a simple React Native CLI app, get the native development environment working locally, and then try to just add in the thing that you need. Maybe there's a mapping library, a third-party mapping library you're trying to get working with Expo and it won't work. Do that as the very first thing you do in React Native CLI to see if you can get over that hump or to see if there are other challenges there as well. So good ways to check, but check out Expo Discord. And if you want to stay in touch, I have a Discord as well. I'd be happy to chat. Maybe some of these detailed Expo questions, the Expo community may be better, but I'll share the links coming up a little later in the stream. Or you can check on codingitwrong.com to see how to get the Discord community, and we can stay in touch that way. All right, so coming back here, I broke the component, so let me put it back. So now we've confirmed that, and once we test the other side of this will increase our confidence, but I think we've mocked the breakpoint with value large, and that means that it hides out. Let me, this would be good enough for me on my own, but I feel like being on a recording that I have some extra accountability to actually know what I'm talking about. So let me log out large to make sure that the value is what we expect. Yep, large, the value of it is the string large. So I guess just module mocks doesn't mess with string values in there. So that works out great. So let's test the opposite side of this condition. Went on a small viewport, and I do have the concept of large, medium, small. That is not too precise in my app yet. So I'm going to say when a viewport that is not large. I guess that is more precise because we do say if it's large or if it's not. That's how we do things. So that's maybe a better way to say it. It renders a button that allows toggling the drawer. Let me put that first because that's kind of the main case. I just didn't write it first. Mock return value, and for realism, let's get medium because that's going either large or medium is going to be returned by that function. So let's just pull in medium. Mock return value medium. So in this case, I expect this to be present, but in fact, instead of checking for it, I can just do fire event press. Do I have fire event? I do. And then expect, what is it that's called? It's navigation.toggleDrawer to have been called with no arguments. And here, I'll keep it in one line, I think. Toggle naz, multiple lines is going to be better. Just function, mock name. Drawer. I'm going to actually, when I make the test fail in a second, I'm going to show the difference of having this mock name versus not. Okay, but so I expect this test to pass. Yes, so it allows toggling the drawer. Apparently toggle drawer was in fact called. So let's break that. Let's not have that and see how the test breaks. Yeah, so expect navigation.toggleDrawer to have been called with, but it was called with, Oh, expected it to be called with 0 arguments, but it was actually called 0 times. And we see the code there. So what if I didn't put in that mock name there? I just like to visualize that because we shouldn't add extra detail to our code unless it's helpful. So if I just say just.function, then when it fails, up here I see expect just function to have been called with expected. So that's not as readable. Now down here in the context of the source code, I see expect navigation.toggleDrawer to have been called. So that's nice, but it's nice, even nicer to have navigation.toggleDrawer above. Sometimes I don't remember to do that, but in this case I did, and so I'm going to do that. JCubeApp says the testing guru is back. It's been a while, Jeremiah. Thanks for joining in. I need to check on your stream to see how you've been doing. Yeah, I've been in and out, and I'm hoping to be back for a while. You know how that is with online content creation, though. It depends. All right. Navigation.toggleDrawer to have been called. So now we're getting this nice function name up here. All right, so I think we have our 4. Oh, I just want to test the other failures here just for completeness. So what if it doesn't show at all? The test should fail because it needs to be found. Yep, it doesn't show. It fails. So I have a pretty good degree of confidence that this behavior is covered. We're covering both the hiding of these 2 buttons based on things even including screen resolution size, so that's pretty cool, as well as the functionality of the buttons when they're there. So we've specified that unit pretty well. Cool. We're at 5:43, so we've got 17 minutes left. Let's see if we can do one more component. New to-do form. Cool. This is a very straightforward one. This is in the sense of like this is a case, forms are extremely common. I do like to test these a lot. So new to-do form. It's maybe an overblown, from a code standpoint, it's a form. From the user interface standpoint, it's just a single field. We say hello stream, hit return, and then it shows up there. So that's all it is, just a very simple, it's just a text input, and it does have an icon though, conditionally showing. I forgot about that. That's some behavior that we can test in there. So we have the form, the name starts out as an empty string. Then when we click, we submit editing, so the return key, that'll be fun to look up how to do that, I forget. Handle create is called. We always dismiss the keyboard, but it's only if the name is present that we call the onCreate prop and we clear out the name. So cool. So this is some edge cases that I'm pretty sure I'm not covering in my higher level tests. And so this will be helpful to cover these at the unit level to kind of get confidence of what's going on. Let's check the Istanbul report to see if that's the case, that they're not fully covered. New to do form. Branch. So statement's 100%, branch is 75%. So let's see what's not covered. I don't see what's not covered. Usually there's some kind of indication on here of what is not covered, but sometimes things can get out of sync. So let me rerun that coverage test one more time. And we'll see if Istanbul will help us. I might even prioritize the branch that's not covered. Yeah, sometimes this gets messed up. So let me remove the coverage directory, test it again. I'm going to go back to all files, components, new to do form. Yeah, I don't know. I've seen things be weird here and not quite so clear. But yeah, usually I feel like in Istanbul, it's indicated to me what branch is not covered. So that's unfortunate. Oh, but if I'm thinking about it thoroughly, hopefully I'll get it all covered. Maybe not in the next 15 minutes though, we'll see. So what are the scenarios? What are the behaviors for new to do form we want to cover? I think I might start with the more edge casey behaviors here, just in case that might actually get us to cover that branch that was missed in advance. All right, so describe new to do form. So now I think about, am I grouping this together or not? I guess it's really, yeah, the scenarios are grouping by what was inputted. Is it valid? Is it invalid? And then we can see, if it is valid, we can see the loading state where that icon shows up. So let's start when it's invalid. When no text is inputted, what does it do? What does it do when no text is inputted? Handle create is called, and I'm saying, like, I'm implying you click this, you hit return. You hit return, it just dismisses the keyboard. Yeah. Cool. So let's confirm that. It may very well be, I would not be surprised if my higher level test does not confirm that the keyboard is dismissed, just because that's such a small and edge casey kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that unit tests, lower level tests are good for, because you don't want this cluttering up your test of the whole screen altogether. All right, so let's copy these imports over. Probably wait for. And then let's import new to do form. Okay, render new to do form. Don't think we need any props at this point. So I think, so now how do we submit this? So I think it's actually fire event submit editing. Let me see if this is in the code somewhere. Yeah, check it out. Fire event add field submit editing. So in here, if you have an on something prop that's a function, you can call fire event on that field. You got to find that field and you just say submit editing and that function will be called. So it's simulating, it's not simulating the keyboard and hitting the return key, because Jest and React Native Testing Library aren't submitting the whole running native environment. It's submitting what's happening in the JavaScript layer. And in the JavaScript layer, a submit editing event gets received. So I'm just going to inline this here. It's screen.getBy text, right? Oh, no. Label text, new to do name. And again, when I learn about role, this will help with that. But it's the label text, the label new to do name. So we want to submit editing on the new to do name field. This is sort of, yeah, no text is input. We're leaving the default. And I want to say, and it can be helpful to write what you want to assert first and then figure out how to mock it to get it to happen. I want keyboard.dismiss to have been called. And again, I'm going to say with to assert that I'm calling it with no arguments. And before I even run the test, ESLint is going to say that's not there. Keyboard is not defined. I'm going to import this. And this may be the case that React Native actually mocks keyboard for me. So let's try it out to see. And again, we'll know for sure because we'll break our code after the test passes. I really just want to see it focused so I can get quick feedback. Oh, this is the other window here. New to do form. I want quick feedback for my test, even when I'm writing my test afterwards. Receive value must be a mock or spy function, but it has a value function dismiss, so it's not a real mock. So let's try here. Let's say, let's see if mocking React Native here works. I don't have a lot of knowledge of very specific ways to mock specific situations because I like to really focus in a generalized way. I want to know how to handle mocking in general regardless of what library I'm working with. And we'll see if that pays off. So we're mocking React Native. We get our keyboard. We'll see if keyboard.dismiss is detectable as a mock function. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading dismiss. So I think the problem here is that dismiss is nested under keyboard so that when React Native is mocked here, it doesn't know what to do. So what you can do in just mock is the second argument can be a function that returns what it should mock this module to be. And we can define a keyboard function in there, just.function. No, keyboard is not that. Keyboard needs to be an object. And keyboard dismiss should be a just.function, mock name, keyboard dismiss. Now there's a big to-do here. I don't really like setting up a mock function up here because it can be fragile. Let me actually just say keyboard like this. We just need keyboard to be an object because then down in here, what I can do is say keyboard.dismiss equals just.function. And what this does, this allows me to avoid, I was just thinking through this on a client project right now, if this could be occurring. If you set a just function up here, then if you don't clear it out right, it might get called in one test, but then another test thinks it was called. Whereas here, if I create a new just function, mock function, inside the test itself, I know for sure the keyboard dismiss will only have been called if I call it within this test. So this prevents leaking of test data between different test scenarios. Let's save and see what happens. It passes. As always, do not trust it if it passes. You now need to see it broken as well. So let's comment out keyboard.dismiss and make sure the test fails. It does. Expect the keyboard dismiss to have been called, but it was called 0 times. So that's great. We're really confirming it. Now let me just roll the dice here and see when I run test coverage if we manage to cover that case that was not covered in our other tests. New to-do form. We actually did. Check it out. 100% is covered. So let me, just to see that difference here, right? Yeah, new to-do form. Navigation drawer, I got some work to do. But let me hide this again. If this test goes away, let's see if that branch comes back. Yeah, I got warnings, I know. New to-do form, only 75% of branches are covered. And so I managed to guess, I wish I could have gotten that feedback automatically, I managed to guess the branch to get full coverage there. So that was lucky, that was great. So this, I was not testing the case where no text is inputted in my larger test. And that's very common for broad integration tests and end-to-end tests, is to not test every branch. That's why it's important to also have lower level component tests and unit tests. Now you could say, okay, I'm only going to test at the unit level this edge case and rely on my broader tests for more broad things. But in this case, I want to add more test coverage to new to-do form to test all of its branches directly. Just coverage can't tell me that because it is running my whole suite altogether unless I change the way it was run. But I'm going to go ahead and cover all the branches here. We just may not have time on the end of the stream. Let's cover one more. And it may be very quick or it may be very broad. Sometimes when the edge case is simpler, like no text is input, I like to put it first. When text is inputted, yeah, this is going to be complicated because we've got on create. I'm confused with myself and I'm wasting valuable time. Well, let me just start writing. I don't need to think through it all in advance. Keyboard.dismiss. I do want to still make sure that keyboard.dismiss is called. Yeah, so render new to-do form. Say text input or new to-do name field is this. We want to fire submit editing. We'll say fire event change text. Change the text to new to-do name, my new to-do. We'll even say new to-do name. That can be helpful in test output. So we change the text to new to-do name and then we submit it. So we do want to make sure that the keyboard dismiss has been called. I also want to make sure that expect on create to have been called with, that actually needs an argument, that needs the name. With the new name, and we need an on create, so let's pass that in. And what else? I think what I'm going to do here is say to do check for loading indicator during loading state. So I'll come back to that separately. Might save that for next week actually, because that's a helpful case. But we'll say it for now this is good enough. It calls the on create function. Say this way, passes the name to the on create prop and dismisses the keyboard. I used to separate out things like this a lot into very small assertions, but I found in React and in React Native that can be challenging. The tests can have more warnings because they kind of don't expect you to split things up that low. Let's save this and see if this happens, this works or not. And let's again go back over to this tab. Oh, update not wrapped in React, set name. On create looks like it was called. Keyboard dismiss was not called. I think what's going on here is that on create I see need to mock resolve value. Do I need to resolve it to anything? Nope, I just need it to resolve. Oh, that's another to do. Do when on create fails. I think that's actually not handled yet in the component. And so that would be another great reason to do it on the stream, is to cover an error scenario that I didn't cover when I was just coding it by hand and then doing a broad test. I bet you mock resolve value will help this to be fixed. And it is not. Okay. Rerun one more time. I may run long here. Okay, on create, keyboard dismiss to have been called. Create name, set name. Catch. So this is maybe not the wisest to have a catch with nothing happening here, but sometimes when this happens in a test, there's an error that's thrown. You can console error E, at least temporarily. Let's save. Yeah, that's interesting. An update to new to form inside a test was not wrapped in act. Oh, maybe it's just not waiting for it because of the resolve value. Yeah. Clears the name and dismisses the keyboard. That's a little long of a test name, so maybe I'd fix that. But you actually want to, if you can, wait. The best way to resolve this, an update was not wrapped in act, error or warning, is to wait for something to change on the screen. A, to make sure that you don't have things leaking and things changing incorrectly after you're done. And B, because it would be good to show feedback to the user about what's happening. So I think here I have a prop change. So I want to await. We need an async test here. Wait for. Did I get that imported properly? I did. And this is screen. This is new today field value. Expect. In fact, I think I can do this. To have value empty string. So wait for the field to have the empty string as its value. I might have gotten some of the API wrong here. Let's see. Yeah, I might be misremembering the just native API here. Just native. To have, that's right, to have prop. Expect it to have prop value empty string. Wait for that text field to have a value prop of the empty string. And it passes. So that is complex enough that I do not at all trust that I have things working. So let's now see the test fail if each of these pieces is missing. So what if we don't dismiss the keyboard? Will the test fail? It does. Expect the keyboard dismissed to have been called. What if we don't clear the name? Will the test fail? Yes, it expects it to have value empty string, but it never did. It always had a new to-do name. And what if we don't call on create? Yeah, expected on create to have been called, and it did not. So this is great. All these things are being asserted, and I can remove these this console error that was not needed there. Great. All right, so we've got some more functionality covered, but we have a few things remaining. We need to check for that loading indicator that appears while it is creating in the middle of that state. Incidentally, that's also going to help us make sure of the sequence of this, that things don't move on. We can actually check. I was thinking about that. How do I know that I'm awaiting on create? When we check the is creating situation, we can check to make sure that the name is not yet cleared and the keyboard is not yet dismissed, as well as the error scenario as well. So that's going to be really fruitful. And so I don't want to gloss past that. I want to hit those next time. So next time, we're going to check for the loading indicator during the loading state. And let's say it this way. Test loading state. Loading indicator. Text not cleared. Keyboard not dismissed. And when onCreate fails, error message. Text not cleared, because that's important. It's frustrating if you type in text, it errors out, and then the text is cleared. Keyboard not dismissed. I don't know if we want that dismissed or not. So I think we're adding extra coverage there. So that'll be fun to look into next time. All right, well, I hope you all enjoyed the React Native test coverage we added today. I think we've seen some value covering a case that wasn't covered by my broader test. I think we're going to see even more value as if my expectation is correct, pun intended, that I've actually missed some error functionality that a unit test is going to help me with. And this is something that I find a lot of value in my test. Loading states, error states, that's really not motivating a lot of the time to retest over and over again in your running application. But having a unit test to test it for you can really increase your assurance and insurance. So thanks so much for joining Elite Tank TV and J Cubed. Appreciate y'all being here. Anybody joining in the comments later, watching recorded on YouTube, I appreciate it. Feel free to engage there. I don't have a link screen. My screen was weird. But if you go to codingit.live, that's a domain name, that'll give you information on the stream, and you can find my website with links to the Discord and anywhere else you might be able to join to stay in touch with me. Please reach out anytime. I love talking about testing. I love hearing about your scenarios and learning from you and being challenged by new things to try out new things as we all level up in React Native testing together. But I hope you've enjoyed it. And we will be back again next week, Tuesday. I don't have the date in front of me, but Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern for more React Native testing together. So thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it. We'll catch you next time. See ya.